Marcus Washington's hands trembled as he pulled his sobbing 5-year-old daughter closer, watching helplessly as airport security approached. The smirking flight attendant who'd just humiliated his entire family on the crowded plane stood triumphantly behind them. "I told you people to know your place," she hissed, just loud enough for Marcus to hear. What the attendant didn't know, the plane she'd just kicked them off belonged to Marcus's family airline. And tomorrow morning, when she arrived, for work, she'd find her security badge wouldn't work. But that would only be the beginning of her nightmare. What would you do if someone with power abused it, not realizing you held even greater power yourself? Before we continue this shocking story, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in justice and standing up against discrimination, hit that like and subscribe button to stay updated on more powerful stories like this one. Marcus Washington had built his $4 billion aviation empire from nothing but determination and brilliance. At 42, he stood as a testament to what could be achieved against all odds, a black man who had climbed to the pinnacle of an industry that had once seemed impenetrable to people who looked like him. His wife Zara, 38, had been instrumental in that journey, leveraging her razor-sharp legal mind as a former aviation attorney to now serve as Washington Airlines' chief legal officer. Together, they were a power couple who commanded respect in boardrooms across America. Their 5-year-old daughter Layla, precocious and bright-eyed, had inherited her parents' quick intelligence and warm smile. The Washington family rarely flew commercial, naturally preferring the convenience and privacy of their own fleet of private jets. But today had been different. An unexpected mechanical issue with their Gulfstream had forced an emergency change of plans. Marcus had an unavoidable meeting in Chicago, and commercial flight was their only option. So here they were, the owners of Washington Airlines, sitting in economy class on one of their own planes. They had declined the first-class upgrade offered when check-in staff recognized Marcus, preferring to keep the family together in the 3 adjacent seats available in economy. Most passengers had no idea who they were. Washington Airlines operated under a holding company, and Marcus had deliberately kept his public profile minimal, valuing privacy and normalcy for his family over recognition. As they settled into their seats, Layla clutching her favorite stuffed pilot bear, Marcus noticed the first disapproving glance from flight attendant Heather Larson. It was subtle, but unmistakable, a flash of something cold when she saw the black family taking their seats. He had seen that look before, too many times throughout his life to misinterpret it. Still, Marcus smiled politely as Heather moved through the cabin preparing for takeoff. He had taught himself and was teaching Layla to always rise above prejudice, to never let it diminish their dignity. The first real sign of trouble came during the initial beverage service. Heather systematically served every white passenger in their section with a smile and friendly banter. When she reached their row, her smile vanished, and she breezed past without a word or even eye contact. 3 times she passed their row, serving passengers behind and in front of them, deliberately skipping the Washington family as if they were invisible. Zara and Marcus exchanged knowing glances, a silent communication born from years of experiencing these microaggressions together. They could handle it. But Layla's confused expression as she watched other passengers receiving drinks while being ignored herself made Marcus's heart ache. It wasn't the first time his daughter had encountered racism, but each new instance still felt like a knife to his chest. This was exactly why he had worked so tirelessly to build his company, to create a world where his daughter wouldn't have to face such indignities. Yet here they were, on his own airline, experiencing the very discrimination he had fought against his entire career. "Excuse me," Layla's small voice carried just far enough for Heather to hear as the flight attendant passed by their row for the 4th time. "May I please have some apple juice?" Heather continued down the aisle as if she hadn't heard the child's polite request. Layla looked up at her father, confusion clouding her bright eyes. "Daddy, why won't she stop for us?" Marcus patted his daughter's hand reassuringly. "Sometimes people are very busy, sweetheart. We'll try again." When Heather passed by once more, Marcus raised his hand slightly to catch her attention. "Excuse me, my daughter would really love some apple juice when you have a moment." The flight attendant's eyes flicked toward them briefly before continuing down the aisle without acknowledgement. Zara shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the lawyer, in her already cataloging this pattern of behavior. When Heather returned up the aisle 10 minutes later, Marcus tried again, his voice firm but polite. "Excuse me, we've been trying to get your attention. Could we please have some drinks?" Heather stopped this time, her expression tight. "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you," she replied, her tone making it clear she had indeed heard them multiple times. Her eyes never quite met theirs as she reluctantly took their drink orders. When Zara mentioned her daughter's peanut allergy ahead of the meal service, Heather rolled her eyes visibly. "You people always have special requests," she muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Zara to hear, but not quite audible to surrounding passengers. The comment hung in the air like poison. Zara stiffened. "Excuse me? What do you mean by you people?" Heads turned in nearby rows. The white couple across the aisle exchanged uncomfortable glances, then deliberately looked away. A middle-aged man in front peered back with a frown, as if the Washingtons were causing unnecessary trouble. Marcus placed a calming hand on his wife's arm and whispered, "Not here, not in front of Layla." He unbuckled his seatbelt. "I'd like to speak with you privately," he told Heather, keeping his voice measured and professional. Heather's hand moved to the call button on her belt. "Sir, I need you to stay seated." Marcus remained standing. "I'm simply requesting a brief conversation away from my daughter's ears. It's a reasonable request." Heather pressed her call button, summoning her colleague Richard Coleman from the front of the cabin. Richard hurried down the aisle, a tall man with a military bearing and a face that defaulted to suspicion. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, directing the question only to Heather. "These passengers are being difficult," Heather said, loud enough for the entire section to hear. "I've tried to accommodate their many demands, but they keep harassing me." The lie was so brazen that Marcus was momentarily speechless. Several passengers were now openly staring, some with phones partially raised, ready to record any escalation. "That's absolutely false," Zara began, her attorney voice emerging. Richard cut her off with a raised hand. "Ma'am, we need everyone to remain calm. This behavior is disrupting the flight." "What behavior?" Marcus asked, his voice rising slightly, despite his best efforts. "We've simply asked for drinks and informed your colleague about an allergy. How is that disruptive?" Heather leaned toward Richard and whispered something. He nodded gravely. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat immediately. Any further disruption will have consequences." As Marcus slowly sat down, Heather announced loudly to Richard, but clearly for the benefit of nearby passengers, "I've tried to be patient with them, but they've been difficult since boarding. Some passengers just think they deserve special treatment." The calculated comment did its work. Murmurs spread through the cabin. The damage was done. In seconds, they had been transformed from a normal family to problem passengers in the eyes of everyone around them. Layla looked up at her father, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Daddy, are we in trouble?" she whispered. Marcus hugged her close, his heart racing with a combination of anger and the old familiar pain of experiencing racism, while being unable to fight back without confirming the very stereotypes being weaponized against them. Have you ever been in a situation where you were treated unfairly, but fighting back seemed like it would only make things worse? Comment number 1 if you think Marcus should have stood his ground more firmly, or number 2 if you believe he made the right choice to de-escalate for his family's sake. Like this video if you've ever witnessed discrimination and wish you'd done more to stop it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that expose the reality many people face every day. What would you do if you were treated this way in front of your child? The Washington family's nightmare was just beginning. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted dramatically. What had begun as subtle discrimination had morphed into a spectacle, with the Washington family cast as the villains. Passengers who had been peacefully reading or watching movies now stole glances at the family, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. A woman 3 rows back leaned toward her companion and whispered something that made them both look at the Washingtons with narrowed eyes. The whispers spread like wildfire. "They're demanding special treatment. The flight attendant seemed scared of them. Maybe they've been drinking. Each fabrication built upon the last, creating a narrative entirely divorced from reality. Marcus noticed a young man in a business suit across the aisle filming discreetly with his phone. He wasn't the only one. At least 3 other passengers had their phones angled toward the Washington family, capturing every moment of their humiliation for social media consumption without context or truth. Layla, sensitive to the changing energy around her, began to feel the weight of dozens of judgmental eyes. Her small shoulders hunched inward as she tried to make herself invisible in her seat. "Mommy, why is everyone looking at us?" she whispered to Zara. Before Zara could answer, tears welled in Layla's eyes and she began to cry softly, overwhelmed by the tension she couldn't understand but could certainly feel. Heather, who had been watching from the galley, seized the opportunity immediately. She strode purposefully down the aisle and stopped beside their row. "Your child is disturbing other passengers," she announced loudly. "I'm going to need to ask you to control her behavior." "She's crying because of how you're treating us," Zara responded, her lawyer's composure beginning to crack. "She's 5 years old and sensing the hostility you've created." Marcus tried to comfort Layla, whispering reassurances and wiping her tears, but the public scrutiny only intensified her distress. The cabin speakers crackled to life with the captain's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're experiencing a slight delay due to a passenger disturbance. We ask for your patience as our crew resolves the situation." The announcement sent a fresh wave of mutters through the cabin. All eyes turned accusingly toward the Washingtons. Zara, having reached her limit, unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. "This has gone far enough. I need to speak with the captain. We are Marcus and Zara Washington, and this is our daughter Layla. We own Washington Airlines through our holding company, Skyward Ventures." Her voice was steady, dignified, the voice that had commanded courtrooms and boardrooms. But before she could continue, Heather stepped forward and physically blocked her path. "Ma'am, sit down immediately or I will be forced to take severe measures." "Do you understand who we are?" Zara pressed, her voice rising despite herself. "We are the owners of this airline, and the way you've treated us is absolutely unacceptable." Heather's laugh was short and dismissive. "Right, and I'm the Queen of England. Security concerns are security concerns, regardless of who you claim to be." She turned to Richard and nodded. Richard moved to the front of the cabin and picked up the intercom phone. His voice echoed throughout the plane moments later. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a security situation, we will be removing several passengers from this flight. We apologize for the inconvenience and thank you for your cooperation." The word security changed everything. In a post-9/11 world, that single word transformed the Washingtons from difficult passengers to potential threats in the minds of everyone aboard. Minutes later, the main cabin door reopened, and 2 airport security officers stepped aboard. They moved directly to the Washington family's row, their faces grim and professional. "Sir, ma'am, we need you and your child to gather your belongings and come with us," the lead officer stated firmly. Marcus looked around the cabin, at the sea of faces watching their humiliation, with a mixture of relief and righteous satisfaction. Some passengers openly filmed the encounter now, certain they were capturing justice rather than injustice. Fighting would only make it worse. The family had no choice but to comply. The walk down the jetway felt endless. With each step, Marcus felt the weight of generations of similar humiliations heaped upon his shoulders. Layla's hand clutched his tightly as she sobbed uncontrollably, her small body shaking with fear and confusion. Behind them, Zara walked with her head held high, though tears of fury and helplessness threatened to spill from her eyes. Airport security flanked them like criminals. Through the windows of the jetway, Marcus could see passengers on the plane, watching their exit, some still filming. One woman even waved mockingly as they passed her window. The public nature of their humiliation was complete. By the time they reached the terminal, Marcus knew the videos would already be circulating on social media, stripped of context, and labeled with whatever narrative Heather and the other passengers chose to assign. He had seen this pattern before, too many times to count. Black families vilified for simply existing in spaces where others felt they didn't belong. As they were escorted through the busy terminal, other travelers stared and whispered. Marcus maintained his dignity, walking, straight ahead and refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing him break. He had built a billion-dollar company by never letting racism derail his focus. He wouldn't start now. "Everything will be okay, Layla," he whispered to his daughter, though at that moment, even he wasn't sure if that was true. When they finally reached the main concourse, the security officers left them with cursory instructions to contact customer service if they wished to rebook their flight. No apology, no acknowledgement of the injustice they had endured. Just bureaucratic indifference to their plight. Zara immediately pulled out her phone. "I'm calling Jacob," she said, referring to Jacob Matthews, their most trusted executive and the current COO of Washington Airlines. "We need to address this immediately." But as she dialed, Marcus noticed notifications flooding his own phone. He opened Twitter to find Washington Airlines already trending. The first video had over 10,000 views in just minutes with a caption that made his blood run cold. Entitled "Family Removed from Flight After Threatening Crew." Claims to own airline. Another post showed Layla crying with text superimposed. Parents use child as shield after causing scene on flight. The narrative had been established, and it bore no resemblance to reality. The Washington family were not victims but villains in this twisted story. Marcus tried calling the airline's executive office directly, but was redirected to general customer service. Even when he identified himself, the representative seemed skeptical. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but I can't escalate this without proper verification. Our executive offices are closed for the evening." It was as if invisible walls had suddenly appeared around systems he owned. "Check your database," Marcus insisted. Marcus Washington, CEO of Skyward Ventures, majority owner of Washington Airlines. "I'm sorry, sir, but I don't have access to ownership records. You'll need to file a formal complaint through our standard channels." Zara, meanwhile, was having similar difficulties reaching Jacob. His assistant claimed he was in meetings and unavailable. Text messages went unanswered. Emails bounced back with automatic replies. Someone had deliberately walled them off from their own company. As the family made their way to baggage claim to retrieve their checked luggage, hoping at least to salvage their belongings before regrouping, another blow awaited them. Their 3 suitcases had been removed from the flight, but Layla's medication for her mild asthma was missing from the front pocket of Zara's bag where she always kept it for easy access. "This can't be happening," Zara whispered, frantically searching through all their bags again. Her inhaler and backup medication were right here. Layla began wheezing slightly, whether from the stress or actual need for her medication. They couldn't be sure, but the timing couldn't have been worse. "We need to get to a pharmacy," Marcus decided, shifting into problem-solving mode. "Then find a hotel for tonight. I'll have our legal team meet us first thing in the morning." What should have been a simple 90-minute flight had devolved into a nightmare with potentially serious consequences for their daughter's health. As Marcus hailed a taxi outside the terminal, a notification alerted him to breaking news on his phone. Family claims airline ownership after being removed for disruptive behavior. Below it was a still image from the plane, caught at the precise moment when Marcus had stood to speak privately with Heather, his expression captured in a fleeting grimace that made him appear aggressive. The media spin machine was already in full force, and the Washington family found themselves fighting not just for their dignity, but potentially for their company and their daughter's well-being. The hotel room felt like a war room. Marcus paced the floor while Zara sat cross-legged on the bed, her laptop open as she monitored the escalating social media firestorm. Layla had finally fallen asleep in the adjoining room after a frightening asthma episode that required an emergency pharmacy run for replacement medication. The Washington family, accustomed to wielding power and influence, had been reduced to scrambling for basic necessities. 16 major news outlets have picked up the story, Zara reported, her voice tight with controlled fury. The headlines are all variations on disruptive family removed from flight, or passengers claim to own airline in bizarre incident. Not a single one has reached out to us for comment. Marcus stopped pacing and sank into an armchair. "Maybe we should just let it go," he said quietly. "Layla's already been through enough. If we fight this publicly, she'll be exposed to even more trauma. We can address the internal issues quietly. Discipline Heather, And implement stronger anti-bias training without turning this into a media circus. Zara closed her laptop and looked at her husband with the intense focus that had made her such a formidable attorney. Marcus, letting this go is exactly what they expect. It's what generations of people who look like us have been forced to do. Swallow the humiliation. Stay quiet. Don't make waves. But we have what most don't have in these situations. We have power. She moved to kneel in front of him, taking his hands in hers. This isn't just about us anymore. This is about every black family that's ever been humiliated on a flight, in a restaurant, in a store. This is about Layla growing up in a world where she knows her parents fought back when they could. Marcus knew she was right. He had built Washington Airlines with a vision of creating the most inclusive, respectful travel experience in the industry. His own company had failed not just his family today, but its core values. "You're right," he said finally, "but we need to be strategic. The last thing I want is to be painted as the angry black billionaire abusing his power for revenge." What neither of them said aloud was the truth they both knew. Black success was always viewed through a different lens than white success. A white billionaire fighting back would be seen as strong and principled. A black billionaire doing the same risked being portrayed as dangerous and vengeful. Marcus reached for his phone and dialed Jacob Matthews directly, bypassing his assistant. After 6 rings, Jacob finally answered, his voice cautious. "Marcus, I just heard what happened. I've been in back-to-back meetings and my assistant just briefed me." "Jacob, I need you to listen carefully," Marcus said, his CEO voice firmly in place. "First, I want every second of security footage from that flight preserved immediately. Second, I want Heather Larson's complete personnel file on my desk by morning. Third, I need to know which board members or executives might be working against me behind the scenes, because someone deliberately blocked our access to management channels today." Jacob's silence spoke volumes. "Jacob?" Marcus prompted. "Is there something you're not telling me?" "Marcus, there's been talk," Jacob admitted reluctantly. "William Farrington has been meeting privately with several board members. I thought it was about the Singapore expansion, but now I'm not so sure." William Farrington. The name made perfect sense. The 65-year-old board member had made no secret of his resentment when Marcus acquired majority control of the airline 5 years ago. Farrington had been passed over for CEO twice, and his old-school mentality clashed frequently with Marcus's progressive vision for the company. "I'll need you to come to our hotel first thing tomorrow morning," Marcus instructed. "Bring whatever information you can gather safely. And Jacob, watch your back. It seems we have multiple battles to fight." As Marcus ended the call, Zara's phone chimed with an alert. Her face darkened as she read the screen. "Marcus, Heather has filed an official incident report. She's claiming you verbally threatened her and made aggressive movements that made her fear for her safety." "That's a blatant lie," Marcus protested, though he wasn't surprised. It was a textbook move, the false accusation that would be difficult to disprove, especially when racial stereotypes already primed people to believe the worst. "That's not all," Zara continued, scrolling through the report that had been forwarded by a friendly contact in HR. "She's claiming the security footage will back up her story, but our source says there's a problem with the video from your section of the plane. Apparently it was corrupted during download. The convenient technical malfunction was the final confirmation. This hadn't been a random incident of discrimination. It had been orchestrated. Someone had wanted the Washington family humiliated publicly, their reputation damaged, their credibility questioned, and they had nearly succeeded." As Marcus looked at his sleeping daughter through the partially open door to the adjoining room, a cold determination settled in his chest. "They picked the wrong family to target," he said quietly. "Tomorrow, we start fighting back." Have you ever been in a situation where you had to decide whether to fight an injustice or let it go for peace of mind? Comment number 1 if you believe the Washingtons should pursue public justice, or number 2 if you think they should handle this privately to protect Layla. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed someone being wrongfully accused and felt powerless to help. Subscribe to our channel for more stories about standing up against systemic injustice. What would you do if someone falsely accused you of threatening them when you were the actual victim? The Washington family's counterattack is just beginning. Heather Larson arrived at Logan International Airport at 5:45 a.m. earlier than usual. She had a spring in her step as she approached the employee entrance, anticipating the praise she would receive for handling yesterday's difficult situation. Her supervisor had hinted at a possible promotion to senior cabin crew, and yesterday's incident would surely demonstrate her ability to manage challenging passengers. She swiped her security badge at the door. The light remained red. She tried. Again, more carefully this time. Still red. Strange. She pulled out her phone to call HR when a security officer approached her. "Ms. Larson, I need to ask you to come with me, please." His tone was professional but cool. Heather followed, confused, but not yet worried. 20 minutes later, she sat in a small conference room in the administrative wing, an area she rarely visited. The door opened, and Jacob Matthews entered. Heather immediately straightened in her chair. The chief operating officer rarely interacted with cabin crew directly. This must be about the promotion. "Ms. Larson," Jacob began without preamble, "are you aware of who you removed from yesterday's Chicago flight?" Heather smiled confidently. "Disruptive passengers who were causing a scene and making threats. I followed all company protocols for passenger safety." Jacob placed a folder on the table between them. "The passengers you removed were Marcus Washington, founder and CEO of Washington Airlines, his wife Zara Washington, our chief legal officer, and their 5-year-old daughter." Heather's smile faltered. That's what they claimed, but anyone can say anything when they're being removed." "It wasn't a claim, Ms. Larson. It was a fact." Jacob opened the folder and turned it toward her. Inside was a company profile with clear photos of the Washington family. Heather felt the first flutter of panic in her chest. This is some kind of joke. They can't be. I mean, everyone knows airline owners don't fly commercial. Mr. Washington frequently flies his own airline to experience the service as a passenger, a practice that apparently yielded some valuable insights yesterday. Jacob's voice had an edge now. "Ms. Larson, you have 2 options. Option 1, you resign immediately, effective today, with a standard non-disclosure agreement. Option 2, you agree to participate in our new comprehensive anti-bias training program as its first case study, sharing your experience openly with colleagues as an educational opportunity." Heather's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This is outrageous. I was doing my job. Those passengers were belligerent. Ask Richard Coleman, he'll back me up." "Mr. Coleman is having a similar conversation down the hall," Jacob replied evenly. "Now, what's your decision?" Heather weighed her options quickly. Resignation would be a black mark on her employment record. The training alternative, while humiliating, would at least keep her employed. She could bide her time, play along, and find another position later. "Fine," she said tightly. "I'll do your training program. But this isn't fair. You have no idea what actually happened on that plane." Jacob stood to leave. "The Washingtons have decided to give you a chance to learn and grow from this incident. Ms. Larson, I suggest you take it seriously." As he left, Heather pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She scrolled to a contact labeled Angie Daily Metro and typed a quick message. "Have major airline whistleblower story. Owner abusing power to punish employees. Exclusive if you want it. Call me." Within an hour, Heather was sitting at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the airport, pouring her version of events into a digital recorder held by an eager young reporter. By noon, the story was live on the Daily Metro website with the headline, "Airline whistleblower speaks out. Billionaire abuses power to punish employee for doing her job." The article portrayed Heather as a dedicated safety professional being persecuted for following protocol. It suggested Marcus Washington was using his wealth and influence to retaliate against employees who didn't recognize him or give him special treatment. The reporter had reached out to Washington Airlines for comment, but the hastily crafted official response about investigating the incident only made the company appear defensive and guilty. By mid-afternoon, the story had been picked up by 3 major networks. The social media tide, which had begun to turn slightly in the Washingtons' favor as people questioned the original narrative, swung dramatically back against them. Airline bully and Dutch boycott Washington began trending. The Washington family, who had spent the morning working with their legal team to build a case against the discrimination they had faced, now found themselves fighting a different battle altogether. The victimizers had successfully cast themselves as the victims, and the actual victims were now viewed as powerful oppressors. It was an old, familiar script, but no less effective for its predictability. And joining us now is Heather Larson, the flight attendant at the center of this developing story. The morning show host's voice was sympathetic as Heather appeared on screen, looking appropriately subdued in a conservative blouse, her hair pulled back neatly. Heather, can you tell us in your own words what happened on that flight? The Washington family watched the interview from their hotel suite, where they had essentially established a command center. Marcus's jaw tightened as Heather launched into her carefully crafted narrative. I was simply doing my job, following our safety protocols. The male passenger became aggressive when asked to comply with standard requests. At no point did they identify themselves as the owners until they were being escorted off, which seemed like a desperate attempt to avoid consequences. The host nodded encouragingly. And how did you feel when you learned they actually were the owners of the airline? Heather's eyes welled with perfectly timed tears. Terrified. I've worked for Washington Airlines for 12 years with an impeccable record. Now my career and reputation are being destroyed because I didn't recognize the owner and give him special treatment. Is that the kind of world we want to live in, where the wealthy can behave however they want without consequences? Zara muted the television in disgust. She's good, I'll give her that. Playing the working-class hero standing up to the big, bad billionaire. Marcus was scrolling through his phone, his expression grim. It gets worse. Conservative outlets are running with the angle that we're playing the race card to deflect from our behavior. They've dug up that lawsuit from 2019 where we sued that resort in Miami for discrimination. We won that case, Zara pointed out. There was clear evidence of discrimination. Doesn't matter. They're painting us as people who cry racism whenever we don't get our way. And liberal outlets aren't much better focusing on the billionaire abuses power angle. Our wealth is being used to undermine our experience of racism, as if money somehow makes discrimination impossible or more acceptable. The reality of their situation was becoming clear. The Washington family had the misfortune of fitting into no one's preferred narrative. Too wealthy to be sympathetic victims to the left, too black to be given the benefit of the doubt by the right. Their actual experience was being drowned out by everyone's eagerness to fit them into pre-existing political frameworks. Zara's phone buzzed with an alert. Marcus, someone leaked our home address online. We're getting death threats. She showed him her screen, where a social media user had posted, "These entitled rich people need to be taught a lesson. Who's up for a visit to their address?" The post had hundreds of likes and shares already. "I'm calling our security team," Marcus said, reaching for his phone. "We need to increase protection at the house and get someone here to the hotel immediately." Before he could dial, his phone rang with an unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Mr. Washington, this is Principal Winters from Layla's school. I'm calling because we've had concerning developments here this morning." Marcus put the call on speaker. "What kind of developments?" "Several parents are protesting outside our gates. They're demanding that Layla be removed from the school, claiming her presence puts other children at risk. They've apparently seen the news reports about your incident on the plane. They're suggesting that if you would threaten airline staff, you might be a danger to school personnel as well." The absurdity of the accusation would have been laughable if it weren't so serious. "That's completely unfounded," Marcus began, but the principal cut him off. "I understand that, Mr. Washington. We've reviewed your family's history with our school and found nothing but positive interactions. However, the situation is causing significant disruption. Perhaps it would be best if Layla studied remotely until this blows over." The suggestion was clear. The school was more concerned about appeasing angry parents than standing by a student being targeted unfairly. It was yet another reminder that even billions of dollars couldn't fully shield his daughter from racism. After ending the call, Marcus and Zara sat in stunned silence. The situation was spiraling beyond anything they had anticipated. Their home was being threatened, their daughter was being driven from her school, and their company was under siege in the court of public opinion. Then Jacob called with the worst news yet. "Marcus, the board is convening an emergency meeting. Tomorrow morning. I've just seen a confidential memo being circulated among certain members. They're suggesting you step down temporarily for the good of the company until the PR crisis passes. The message was clear. Even within his own company, forces were moving against him, using this incident as cover for a coup they had likely been planning for some time. Marcus now faced an impossible choice: fight for his company or fight for his principles. The traditional playbook would suggest sacrificing one to save the other, but Marcus Washington hadn't built a billion-dollar company by following traditional playbooks. "Jacob, leak to the press that I'll be attending that board meeting in person," he instructed. "And get me everything you can find on William Farrington's background. Everyone has skeletons, it's time we found his." The knock on the hotel door came at 11:23 p.m. Marcus approached cautiously, checking the peephole before opening. The man standing in the hallway was familiar but unexpected. Richard Coleman, the male flight attendant who had backed up Heather's lies on the plane. "Mr. Washington," Richard said quietly, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "I need to speak with you. It's important." Marcus hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Come in, Mr. Coleman." Zara looked up from her laptop, surprised to see the flight attendant entering their suite. She stood immediately, her posture defensive. "What are you doing here?" Richard held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I've come to tell you the truth. What happened on that plane? It wasn't right, and it wasn't random." Once seated, Richard's story tumbled out in a rush of guilt and fear. Heather has a history of this behavior. She's been reported multiple times for discriminatory treatment of black passengers, especially those in first class or those who assert themselves in any way. But nothing ever sticks because she's smart about it. She keeps it just subtle enough. And she's connected. Her uncle is a vice president in operations. Marcus and Zara exchanged glances. This confirmed their suspicions, but didn't explain the larger conspiracy they had begun to uncover. "Why are you telling us this now?" Marcus asked. Richard stared at his hands. "Because I've been complicit. I've backed her up, looked the other way. After what happened yesterday, I couldn't sleep. The look on your daughter's face." He trailed off. "Then today, the news coverage, the lies being told. It's not right." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. This contained statements from 5 black passengers who filed complaints about Heather in the past 18 months. All the complaints were lost in the system or dismissed for insufficient evidence. I also have testimonials from 3 flight attendants who've witnessed her behavior but were afraid to speak up. As Marcus took the flash drive, Richard continued. "There's more. After you were removed from the flight, Heather was bragging in the galley. She said someone important would be very pleased with how she handled the situation, that it went exactly according to plan. I thought she was just trying to impress us, but now I'm not so sure." The confession added another disturbing layer to an already complex situation. As Richard was leaving, he turned back with one final piece of information. There was a white passenger in 14C who filmed the entire interaction. He tried to speak up for you at the gate after you were removed, saying the crew's actions were clearly discriminatory. The gate agent dismissed him, but he was furious. He said he was going to post the full unedited video online to show what really happened. Throughout the night, more support emerged from unexpected quarters. 3 former passengers contacted the Washingtons through their company website, sharing similar stories of discrimination they had experienced on Washington Airlines flights. Each expressed shock that such treatment could occur on an airline known for its inclusive values, and each offered to speak publicly about their experiences. A former employee reached out with screenshots of emails showing how discrimination complaints were systematically buried within the company's customer service department, often without ever reaching HR or legal teams. The most significant breakthrough came at 3:17 a.m. when Marcus received an email with the subject line, "Full video from Flight 372. The sender, a Professor James Whitman from Boston University, had been the passenger in 14C. His message was simple. "What happened to your family was wrong. I've been hesitant to get involved, but after seeing the false narrative in the media, I cannot remain silent." Attached is the complete, unedited video of the incident. I'm happy to be deposed or to make a public statement if needed. The video showed exactly what the Washingtons had experienced. Heather's deliberate ignoring of their requests, her whispered comments, her escalation of a non-situation into a security issue. Most importantly, it clearly showed Marcus's calm, non-threatening demeanor throughout, directly contradicting Heather's claims of aggression. By morning, a coalition of powerful aviation industry leaders had privately reached out to express support. While few were willing to speak publicly yet, their behind-the-scenes influence could be crucial in the boardroom battle to come. The tide was beginning to turn. Then, just hours before a scheduled press conference where Richard Coleman was set to tell his story alongside the Washingtons, Zara received an alarming call. "Mrs. Washington, this is Detective Salazar with Boston PD. We're calling because Richard Coleman has been reported missing. He failed to show up for his shift this morning, and his apartment shows signs of a possible struggle. His neighbor reported hearing raised voices late last night. Given his connection to your current situation, we wanted to inform you directly." The battle had just escalated dramatically. Someone was willing to go to extreme lengths to silence the truth. As Marcus ended the call with the detective, he looked at Zara with grim determination. "This isn't just about discrimination anymore. This is about corruption at the highest levels of our company, and possibly criminal activity. Would you have the courage to come forward like Richard Coleman did, knowing it might cost you your job or worse?" Comment number 1. If you believe speaking truth to power is always worth the risk? Or comment number 2 if you think self-preservation would have to come first in a situation like this. Hit that like button if you've ever been the lone voice standing up for what's right when everyone else stayed silent. Subscribe to see how the Washingtons navigate this increasingly dangerous situation. The question now is, just how far will their enemies go to silence the truth? And who is really pulling the strings behind this elaborate setup? Detective Salazar arrived at the Washingtons' hotel suite with 2 officers in tow. They were professional but guarded, clearly uncertain whether the Washingtons were victims or perpetrators in the increasingly complex situation. "We've located Mr. Coleman's cell phone," Salazar informed them. "It was dumped in a trash can 2 blocks from his apartment. The last call he made was to this hotel at approximately 11:15 p.m. "That tracks with when he visited us," Marcus confirmed. "He left around midnight. He was nervous but seemed determined to do the right thing." The detective made notes. "And what exactly did he share with you during this meeting?" Marcus glanced at Zara, who gave a slight nod. This was no time for secrecy. He handed over a copy of the flash drive Richard had provided. Evidence of systematic discrimination by a flight attendant named Heather Larson, and suggestions that yesterday's incident on our flight was premeditated. As the detective reviewed the materials, Zara's phone lit up with an incoming call from an investigator they had hired overnight. She stepped away to take it, returning moments later with new information. "Marcus, our investigator found something. Heather Larson made 3 calls to a private number registered to Farrington Enterprises immediately after filing her report yesterday, and again this morning before her television appearance." The detail caught Detective Salazar's attention. "Farrington Enterprises? As in William Farrington, the airline board member?" Marcus nodded grimly. "The same. He's been trying to push me out for years, but this level of orchestration seems extreme, even for him." Further investigation throughout the day revealed a disturbing pattern. The mechanical issue that had grounded the Washingtons' private jet had been reported by a maintenance technician who had recently been hired from a company owned by a Farrington subsidiary. The technician had signed off on a faulty hydraulic system that any qualified inspector would have flagged as operational. Heather had been specifically assigned to that flight through a last-minute crew change, ordered by a mid-level manager with ties to Farrington. Even the social media campaign had suspicious elements. Analysis of the accounts pushing the anti-Washington hashtags revealed a network of recently created profiles with bot-like behavior patterns, all amplifying certain narratives while suppressing others. By late afternoon, Zara had assembled enough evidence to build a compelling case for conspiracy. "It's not just discrimination," she told Marcus as they prepared for the emergency board meeting. "It's corporate sabotage, potentially criminal endangerment, and defamation at minimum." Just as they were preparing to leave for Washington Airlines headquarters, Marcus received a devastating call. Marcus, it's Jacob. We have a problem. Your CFO, Thomas Reed, just entered the boardroom with William Farrington. He's carrying financial documents that weren't on the agenda. I overheard them mentioning a vote of no confidence. Thomas Reed had been with Marcus for 12 years, since the early days of building the airline. His betrayal cut deeper than any other aspect of the conspiracy. They're making their move, Marcus said quietly, ending the call. Thomas has all our financial details, including those offshore expansion plans that could be twisted to look questionable out of context. Zara grabbed her briefcase. Then we better get there before they can finish their presentation. This isn't just about yesterday's incident anymore. This is about the future of everything we've built. The Washington Airlines boardroom had never felt so hostile. 14 board members sat around the polished mahogany table, their expressions ranging from openly antagonistic to carefully neutral. William Farrington occupied the chair's position, at the head of the table, a seat that technically belonged to Marcus. It was a power play, deliberate and symbolic. Ah, Marcus, Zara, thank you for joining us. Farrington's voice dripped with false cordiality. Given the current situation, we thought it best to proceed with addressing some urgent matters. Thomas was just walking us through some concerning financial projections. Marcus took in the scene calmly, noting which board members avoided his gaze, and which seemed uncertain. He had weathered boardroom coups before, though never one so elaborately staged. Before we continue, Marcus said, I'd like to address the actual reason for this meeting. The incident on yesterday's flight and the subsequent media coverage. Farrington smiled thinly. Of course, that's on our agenda as well. But perhaps the financial stability of the company takes precedence over a personal matter. It's not personal when it involves the deliberate humiliation of the company's founder and his family as part of a coordinated effort to seize control of the airline. Zara interjected, opening her briefcase. What you're describing sounds rather paranoid, Farrington replied, his confidence unwavering. We're simply concerned about Marcus's stability given recent events, his confrontation with staff, the public outbursts. What public outbursts? Marcus challenged. The ones Heather Larson fabricated for the media? The ones contradicted by actual video evidence and eyewitness testimony? For the next 30 minutes, Zara methodically presented their evidence. The suspicious maintenance report on their private jet, Heather's reassignment to their flight, the calls between Heather and Farrington, the coordinated social media campaign. The board members listened with increasing discomfort as the picture became clear. Farrington's confident smile gradually hardened into a grimace. When Zara finished, there was a heavy silence. Farrington broke it with a dismissive wave. Circumstantial at best. Creative storytelling by a lawyer trying to distract from her husband's behavior. The fact remains that public perception has turned against Washington Airlines under Marcus's leadership. The stock has dropped 12% since yesterday. For the good of the company, a temporary leadership change is necessary. He nodded to the corporate secretary. I move to call a vote of no confidence in Marcus Washington as CEO, effective immediately. Before anyone could second the motion, the boardroom doors opened. Detective Salazar entered, accompanied by 2 officers and a haggard but determined Richard Coleman. Sorry to interrupt, Salazar announced, but I believe Mr. Coleman has information relevant to your discussions. Richard stepped forward, his hands shaking slightly but his voice steady. I was abducted from my apartment last night by 2 men claiming to work for airline security. They held me in a warehouse, trying to force me to sign a statement claiming that Marcus Washington had bribed me to change my story. When I refused, they threatened my family. He pointed directly at Farrington. They said they were acting on orders from the top that I needed to play ball if I wanted to keep my job and keep my family safe. Farrington's face flushed with anger. This is absurd. You have no proof of any connection to me. Actually, Salazar interjected, Mr. Coleman was able to identify one of his abductors from company photos. The individual in question has already confessed and implicated several others, including direct links to your office, Mr. Farrington. The boardroom erupted in shocked murmurs. Taking advantage of the chaos, Farrington's attorney leaned forward. Even if certain overzealous individuals took matters too far, The financial concerns about Mr. Washington's leadership remain valid. The technically correct procedure would be to proceed with the vote, while these criminal allegations are investigated separately. It was a desperate but legally sound argument. Marcus watched several board members nodding reluctantly, swayed by the technicality. Years of building this company, of creating an airline that stood for inclusion and excellence, and it could all be undone by procedural maneuvering. The corporate secretary looked uncertain. According to bylaws, we should proceed with the scheduled vote. Just as it seemed the momentum had shifted irreversibly in Farrington's favor, the boardroom, doors opened once more. This time, Heather Larson entered, escorted by another detective. Her eyes were red from crying, her confident media persona completely dissolved. "I need to make a statement," she announced, her voice breaking. "Everything I said about Marcus Washington threatening me was a lie. I was told to target his family specifically, to create an incident that would embarrass him publicly. It was all planned." "By whom?" Detective Salazar asked. Heather pointed at Farrington. "Him," he promised, "me a management position and a significant bonus if I helped put Washington in his place." Those were his exact words. Farrington leapt to his feet. "She's lying. This is clearly a desperate attempt by Washington to maintain control. I move that we proceed with the vote immediately, before any more theatrical interruptions." The judge's expression remained neutral, but Marcus detected a slight tightening around his eyes as he reviewed a final document submitted by Farrington's team. "Based on the technical argument regarding stock valuation in the bylaws, I am compelled to allow the vote to proceed, despite the serious allegations that have been raised." It was the technicality they had feared. Even with all the evidence of conspiracy, the legal maneuvering might still cost Marcus his company. As the board members prepared for the vote, Marcus stood tall, prepared to accept whatever came. He had built this airline from nothing. He could do it again if necessary. Some principles were worth losing everything for. As the board prepared to cast their votes, a commotion erupted outside the boardroom. The doors burst open, and Jacob Matthews rushed in, breathless and triumphant. "You need to see this," he announced, turning on the large display screen on the wall. The screen showed a live feed of the lobby downstairs. It was filled with Washington Airlines employees, hundreds of them, all wearing company uniforms and holding signs with messages like "Stand with Washington" and "No to Discrimination." "What is this?" Farrington demanded. "A publicity stunt?" Jacob shook his head. "It's completely spontaneous. After the truth started leaking out about what really happened on that flight, employees began showing up. Pilots, flight attendants, ground crew, maintenance workers. They're all here to support Marcus." He switched to a social media feed where "I Stand with Washington" was trending globally, having eclipsed the negative hashtags from earlier. Video testimonials from former passengers sharing their positive experiences on Washington Airlines flooded the feeds, many specifically mentioning the inclusive culture Marcus had fostered. "The mainstream media has picked it up too," Jacob continued, switching to a news channel where a respected industry analyst was speaking. "What we're seeing is unprecedented solidarity within the airline industry. Multiple carriers have issued statements supporting Marcus Washington and condemning discrimination. Several major corporate clients have announced they will suspend their contracts with Washington Airlines if leadership changes as a result of this incident." In real time, the narrative was being reclaimed. Truth was breaking through the carefully orchestrated campaign of lies. Thomas Reed, the CFO who had betrayed Marcus, shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the board members watched the growing crowd of supporters. The corporate secretary's phone buzzed repeatedly with incoming messages. "Sir," she said to Farrington, "we're receiving hundreds of customer service calls. Passengers are threatening mass cancellations if Mr. Washington is removed." The oldest board member, Eleanor Jeffries, removed her glasses slowly. "William, I think it's time to reconsider this vote. The public has spoken, and they're clearly standing with Marcus." Farrington's face contorted with fury. "This changes nothing. The vote proceeds as scheduled. I remind everyone of their fiduciary duty to the shareholders." "Speaking of shareholders," Zara interjected smoothly, sliding a document toward the corporate secretary. You might want to see this before proceeding. The document detailed Farrington's own history of discrimination complaints at his previous companies, all quietly settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. Most damning was a recorded conversation from years earlier, where he had complained about the changing demographics of the airline industry, using language that would destroy any executive's career if made public. "This is blackmail," Farrington hissed. "It's transparency," Marcus corrected. "Something you've fought against your entire career. The board deserves to know exactly who is asking them to follow him into the abyss." One by one, board members, who had seemed ready to vote against Marcus, began to reconsider. The momentum shifted palpably in the room. When the judge reviewed the new evidence regarding Farrington's past, his expression darkened. "In light of this additional information, and the clear public sentiment, I am reversing my earlier position. The vote of no confidence is suspended pending a full investigation of all parties involved." Farrington's carefully constructed coup collapsed in real time. As security escorted him from the boardroom, his parting glare at Marcus contained a lifetime of resentment and a promise that this wasn't over. But for now, at least, the Washington family had prevailed. The company remained in Marcus's control. The board unanimously voted to launch a thorough investigation into discrimination practices throughout the airline, and public support continued to surge. As they left the boardroom that evening, surrounded by cheering employees, Marcus and Zara allowed themselves to believe the worst was behind them. The battle had been won. Justice had prevailed. What they didn't realize was that William Farrington, a man who had built his career on ruthlessness, had one final desperate act of vengeance planned, one that would put not just the company but countless lives at risk. 3 days after the boardroom showdown, life was beginning to return to normal for the Washington family. Marcus had returned to his CEO duties, implementing immediate changes to address the systemic issues revealed by their ordeal. Zara had established a special legal task force dedicated to reviewing every discrimination complaint the airline had received in the past 5 years. Even Layla seemed to be recovering from her trauma, though she still asked questions that broke her. "Horses' hearts, Daddy. Did they make us leave the plane because of our skin?" Questions no 5-year-old should have to ask. On this particular morning, Marcus was reviewing the daily operations report when Jacob burst into his office, his face ashen. "Marcus, we have an emergency. Maintenance has discovered evidence of tampering on 6 aircraft during routine inspections. Critical system components were deliberately damaged in a way that wouldn't trigger immediate alarms, but could cause catastrophic failure during flight." Marcus was on his feet instantly. "Ground every plane in the fleet, immediately. Full safety inspections before anything takes off again." As the emergency protocols activated across the airline's global network, inconveniencing thousands of passengers but potentially saving countless lives, the investigation quickly traced the sabotage to a maintenance supervisor with direct ties to Farrington. The man confessed when confronted, revealing that Farrington had promised him an executive position in the new regime after Washington was removed. The supervisor had recruited a small team of disgruntled employees to execute the plan, timing the sabotage so that the failures would occur after Farrington had distanced himself from the airline, casting further doubt on Marcus's leadership. The FBI arrested Farrington at his estate that evening, charging him with conspiracy, corporate espionage, and attempted criminal endangerment on a massive scale. Heather Larson, facing her own legal consequences, agreed to testify against him in exchange for reduced charges. In the aftermath of the thwarted sabotage, Marcus called an all-hands meeting of Washington Airlines employees, standing before thousands in the company's main hangar, with millions more watching the live stream globally. He spoke from the heart. "What happened to my family on that flight wasn't just about us. It was a symptom of a deeper problem that exists throughout our society. Today we commit not just to addressing that single incident, but to creating systemic change within our industry." He announced the launch of the most comprehensive anti-discrimination initiative in aviation history. Every employee would receive extensive training. Transparent reporting systems would be implemented for passengers and staff. Independent auditors would regularly test the airline's practices through undercover operations. Most significantly, Washington Airlines would create the industry's first passenger Bill of Rights, guaranteeing equal treatment regardless of race, religion, gender, or any other characteristic. Within months, the changes began to show results. Discrimination complaints dropped significantly. Employee satisfaction scores reached all-time highs. Industry observers noted that other airlines were beginning to adopt similar practices, unwilling to be left behind in what was becoming a major selling point for travelers. 1 year after the incident, Washington Airlines was recognized by 3 independent organizations for having the most diverse workforce and leadership team in the industry. Boarding one of their planes now meant encountering crews that looked like America itself, a visible commitment to inclusion that passengers noticed and appreciated. For the Washington family, the most meaningful moment of healing came on Layla's 6th birthday. Marcus arranged for her to sit in the captain's seat of a parked plane, wearing a pilot's hat specially made for her. As she gripped the controls, beaming with joy, Layla made an announcement that brought tears to her father's eyes. "When I grow up," she declared confidently, "I'm going to be a pilot so I can help make sure everyone feels welcome in the sky." In that moment, Marcus knew that despite the trauma they had endured, something precious had been preserved in his daughter. Her belief that she could change the world for the better. The flight attendant who had kicked them off their own plane had unwittingly sparked a transformation, not just of an airline, but of an industry. From discrimination had come reform. From hatred had come healing. And from one family's willingness to stand up for what was right had come a legacy that would benefit countless passengers for generations to come. This story reveals powerful truths about racism and privilege in modern society. First, discrimination doesn't disappear with wealth or status, it merely transforms. The Washington family's billions couldn't shield them from the humiliation and injustice that many black families face daily. Second, systems often protect perpetrators rather than victims, especially when racism intersects with power. Heather's lies were initially believed because they aligned with harmful stereotypes, while the Washington's truth was dismissed for the same reason. The story also demonstrates how media narratives can be weaponized against marginalized communities, turning victims into villains through selective framing. Perhaps most importantly, it shows that fighting systemic racism requires both personal courage and institutional power. The Washingtons prevailed not just because they were determined, but because they had resources most victims of discrimination don't have. The ultimate lesson lies in what they chose to do with their victory. Rather than seeking revenge, they created systemic change that would benefit countless others. True justice isn't just about vindicating yourself. It's about transforming broken systems so future generations won't face the same struggles. As Layla's innocent aspiration shows, the greatest victory against hatred is preserving hope and the belief that we can create a better world. What moment in this story resonated most deeply with you? Was it the initial humiliation, the corporate conspiracy, or perhaps the transformation that came from standing up for what's right? Comment below with your thoughts and share a time when you witnessed or experienced discrimination and how it was handled. If you believe in creating a world where everyone is treated with dignity, regardless of their race, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that shine a light on important social issues. Share this video with someone who needs to understand that racism persists at all levels of society and that we all have a role in combating it. Thank you for joining us for this powerful story. May we all find the courage to stand up against injustice when we see it, and the wisdom to use whatever privilege we have to create positive change for others.